So, watching from this bridge, at first, during Maumee time, we would be right on the shoreline here of lowest Maumee. This ravine below us would not yet have been eroded out. Now, the focal point of all the erosion in this spillway is this outlet, this gap, where the main stem flows through the Defiance moraine right here. The streams feed to this gap from two opposite directions, making the spillway, the one-time spillway, act like a funnel, with the central drain here. And just look at the size of that confluence. All the streams to the west have reversed direction in order to follow the shoreline of Lake Maumee out through that drain. The falling elevation of Lake Maumee made these streams downcut in order to extend themselves to the lower elevation. They downcut their channels in response to the gradient disequilibrium between their headwaters and this new lower outfall. Much of this material that was carried out of the spillway piled up as a delta against the next proglacial lake that formed in the Erie Basin, and this one was named Arkona. Now, of course, watching from the Wolf Creek Trestle at this time, the embayment of Lake Maumee would be gone, and the Raisin would be carving its channel deeper into that empty spillway. That is the south branch and the main stem, and all the tributaries feeding into them, stretching themselves to that new lower base level out there in Lake Arkona. But Lake Arkona was not the extreme. It was just an interim, and there were other interims. But the one we're interested in is the extreme low lake level. That was Lake Ypsilanti, all the way down to 344 feet. Now, this sketch shows the Huron River gathering into one stem in Washtenaw County, and below it, in parallel, the River Raisin forming its one stem there in Monroe County. And this work, done in 1963, proved that the Huron River cut its channel to bedrock. That's more than 150 feet from surface level to bedrock in the vicinity of Ford Lake. And because the Raisin flows across the same bedrock topography and surface topography, in parallel with the Huron, it's assumed that the Raisin likewise cut its channel to bedrock, probably that 150 feet that this chart shows, during those same episodes of very low base levels. Oh my goodness, what can we imagine it might have been like during low Lake Ypsi time? Now here's an example of a stream flowing on bedrock, and this is down in Tennessee, which was never glaciated. Probably the bottom of this ravine or canyon was very narrow, and the deeper it went, the wider the channel became, based on sloughing off of the walls and the meandering of the river side to side. Now, this little idealized graphic made for educational purposes is amazingly similar to the Raisin Channel in our spillway. We have those arcuate bluffs, we have those terraces or point bars, and underneath, deep down where we can't see, we probably have that V-shaped channel. So the great width of the Raisin Channel, almost a half-mile wide, generally, happened during this low Lake Ypsi time. Now, Lake Ypsilanti is just one of the more extreme lakes within the context of thousands of years of meltwater lakes forming all around the periphery of the receding ice mass. Now, these lakes came and went. They rose, they fell. The ice sometimes came back and changed the configuration of the lakes tremendously. Just a short distance from the Wolf Trestle, we descend to the lowest point on the rail trail. In the center of Adrian, the rail trail comes right up to the river's edge. Here, the south branch of the River Raisin has cut its channel 50 or 60 feet deeper than the flat shelf on which the downtown streets are built. Now, the Kiwanis Trail does continue another mile or so down to Riverside Park, following the river and hopscotching from terrace to terrace inside the meander channel. And these terraces very slowly, imperceptibly step up in elevation. And if we follow them all the way out to Sand Creek, we'll find we're back up at the 800-foot level of the original spillway. But back here at Trestle Park, we're at the lowest point on the rail trail. And there's that water. Now, this is strong water moving very swiftly, so it has no trouble carrying this amount of sediment. Now, it's known that there's too much phosphorus and nitrogen in this river. But beyond the phosphorus and nitrogen, it's just plain loaded with sediment. And sediment always lands somewhere. When the water slows down enough, it'll drop particles carried in suspension and create point bars, deltas, and so forth. Now, the baseball diamond and the parking lot here at Trestle Park are built on one of these dry terraces in the meander channel, just below Main Street here. And something interesting. This terrace measures at about 735 to 740 feet. And this is interesting, or at least coincidental, because this is the very same elevation as resurgent Lake Whittlesey. Well, the most important and highest resurging lake in the Erie Basin that affected our spillway, no longer a spillway, was Lake Whittlesey. Well, I admit to having a very special affection for Lake Whittlesey. It lasted for 1,000 years. It refilled the Erie Basin almost up to the Defiance Moraine, and it left the most prominent beach strand around the Erie Basin of all the several meltwater lakes that stood in the basin. Its beach strand is the most prominent. And so I picture Lake Whittlesey as something like this. This is Lake Michigan, wonderful waves, big lake, lovely beach. Although Whittlesey's beach has a much higher gravel content than this sandy beach. And today it's invisible to those who don't know about it. It's very close to our spillway here, and we can find it under the Ridge Highway. It's more distinct on the east side, which is the downslope side of the Erie Basin. And this LiDAR map even shows how its beach bends into the main stem of the Raisin. And if we imagine how this great wide ravine carved during low Lake Ypsilanti time was a wide open space with only the river flowing through at the very bottom. As resurgent Whittlesey roared up the sides of the Erie Basin, we can imagine how that Lake Whittlesey water would have flowed right in to our spillway. And that would have created a lovely estuary situation inside the spillway. reminiscent of Lake Maumee time, except not shallow like Maumee. Remember that Lake Maumee was only about 2 feet deep, initially at least. We were wading in it when we were on the trail in those days. Now, though, this vast, deep cavity has been carved during low Lake Ypsilanti time, and if the bottom of that ravine, the bedrock, lay at about 600 or 650 feet, and the surface elevation of Lake Whittlesey's water stood at about 735 to 740 feet, that gives us an idea of how deep this embayment of our spillway may have been at that time, probably about 140 feet deep. For a time. Now, Kunkel's probing of the Huron River found a downcut cavity all the way to bedrock and later refilled by fluvial sediments. This dotted material here is sediment that came out of suspension and refilled that canyon. Assuming a parallel situation in the Raisin, I'm imagining the embayment of Lake Whittlesey in the spillway as deepest here at the gap and less deep here up toward Tecumseh and west toward Adrian and beyond. But whatever its depth, it was a protected area, a protected estuary. Quite different from outside the spillway where the lake was big and strong and building up a large gravel beach. Inside the spillway was quiet. An environment perfect for incoming streams to drop their sediments. Apparently, sediment just like this is what dropped out of suspension and completely refilled the valley of the Raisin here inside the spillway. Now, this sketch, one thing it's showing inadvertently is this cycle of deep erosion followed by a grading, that is, refilling with this alluvium, and then again erosion. And we can see that here, this speckled alluvium filled this cavity up to the level of Whittlesey, which was 740. And then after Whittlesey time, a meandering river took that speckled infill down. See that terrace there at about 680 feet. That's a terrace made by a meandering river. This is an amazing Ice Age landscape here. Now, the rail trail followed the Great Raisin erosion story. The great amount of erosion that began during Lake Maumee time. Reading this chart from right to left, at Maumee time, off the charts high at A, Maumee time. The great canyon cut deep during Lake Ypsilanti time, here at B. The amazing grading during the high water time again at Lake Whittlesey time here, C. And then this D is another time of downcutting, which I simplified out of the story. And then this long period of settling to the modern Lake Erie level, whose effects we can see out here in the wide meander channel of the Raisin in the spillway.